My name is Christina Lay, and I am really excited for the opportunity to speak today to you all on this very important topic. I will start by providing an overview of my personal experience in diplomacy and security. So I started my career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kyrgyzstan, working on women's and girls' education and empowerment initiatives, including on combating bride kidnapping and gender-based violence in rural areas. Following the Peace Corps, I worked at a microfinance nonprofit organization that focused on financial education, empowerment, and financing, especially for women in Malawi, Pakistan, and other countries. I joined the State Department in 2009, and I served as an economic officer in Mexico, where I analyzed the impacts of narco trafficking on foreign direct investment, economic growth, migration, and trade in Mexico. And as a consular officer, I led the consular section's economic treaty visas for Mexicans seeking to invest and open businesses in the United States. Following my assignment in Mexico, I served as a political officer in Athens, Greece, where I oversaw human rights reporting and related public diplomacy efforts during an economic and refugee crisis that was exacerbated by the rise of a far-right neo-Nazi political party in Europe. As the Philippines desk officer in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs in Washington, D.C., I led the development and implementation of political military policies related to the South China Sea during the Philippines' dispute against China in The Hague's Permanent Court of Arbitration. I also helped increase U.S.-Philippine security cooperation and assistance during this time, including negotiations on U.S. military access. As a National Security Fellow at a Washington, D.C.-based think tank called the Center for New American Security, I participated in a year-long National Security Leaders Program led by former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Michelle Flournoy, and engaged with a cohort of National Security Fellows from a diverse range of backgrounds in defense, military, civil society, private sector, journalism, academia, and development spheres. As a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, I spent a year in the U.S. intelligence community and saw firsthand how the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, FBI, and other intelligence agencies play a role in contributing to national security and foreign policy. And now, as a political military officer in the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, I focus on managing our U.S.-Japan alliance, and in particular, issues related to Okinawa, where we have a large number of U.S. military bases and personnel. So today, I will focus my comments on three areas. First, opportunities for women in diplomacy and security. Second, challenges that the women face. And lastly, areas for growth. First, on opportunities. The inclusion of women in the field of diplomacy and security contribute to peace and long-lasting change. Research and case studies of peace processes reveal how women's participation, whether in official negotiating roles or through grassroots efforts, contributes to reaching lasting peace agreements. An International Peace Institute study of 182 signed peace agreements between 1989 and 2011 found that when women were included in peace processes, there is a 35% increase in the probability that a peace agreement will last 15 years or more. The participation of civil society groups, including women's organizations, makes a peace agreement 64% less likely to fail. When women participate in peace processes, the resulting agreement is more enduring and better implemented. Evidence indicates that women participants in peace processes are usually focused less on the spoils of the war and more on reconciliation, economic development, education, and transitional justice, all critical elements of a sustained peace. Furthermore, higher levels of gender equality are associated with a lower propensity for conflict. For example, women bring additional perspectives. For example, when I was in Greece, I would visit detention centers for migrants and refugees. They were run by Greek authorities, and the vast majority of them were men. During such a massive international refugee crisis, the Greek officials were focused on capturing and deporting migrants, not on respecting civilian and humanitarian nature of refugee camps. I saw that they were not considering the needs of women and children in the design of the refugee camp. Women and children were often placed together with strangers, including men from many different other countries. This was unacceptable, and I was able to use the full force of the US government behind me to demand private sleeping areas and bathrooms for women and children. This type of perspective, seen through a gendered lens, would not be possible without the participation of women. There are invisible barriers that men cannot see. This is not exclusive to just diplomacy and peace and security. Data bias often excludes female perspectives. For example, car crash test dummies are modeled after a man's average weight and height. Medicinal doses are not specifically tested for women. And NASA's first all-woman spacewalk took 61 years to finally happen because spacesuits were not designed for women. So in addition to providing diverse perspectives, women also act as conveners, bringing diverse groups together. For example, when I was in Mexico, I helped organize the first venture capital conference in Monterrey, Mexico, bringing investment opportunities to small and medium-sized enterprises with over 60 speakers and 300 participants. In Greece, I worked with the State Department, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security to organize a conference on combating discrimination, violence, and intolerance based on religion and national origin, bringing together groups in Greece that had little interaction with each other, civil society and minority groups, with representatives from government ministries, police, and prosecutors, to discuss problems faced by illegal migrants, trafficking victims, and other marginalized groups. In both instances, I could influence the participants and speakers. Oftentimes, organizers of such events have blind spots and overlook diversity in representation. As a woman, you know how often you are the only woman in the room or only minority, and so you don't have those blinders. In decision-making positions, you can help influence and shape events to be inclusive of less represented groups, and therefore bring opportunities and convene diverse groups. Women can also serve in positions that are seen as non-threatening to the status quo. As a woman, you are sometimes perceived as non-threatening to men. So one US diplomat told me that the local police and military counterparts in a foreign country were very open to working with her and would often privately express their preference for her over her male colleagues or those who had military or police backgrounds. Because she's a woman, the local law enforcement and military didn't feel that they had to show how tough they were or engage in competition if she were a man. She could more efficiently get down to business instead of sizing one another up, and the local police chief was more likely to admit what kind of help he needed. Oftentimes, as a foreigner or a representative of the US government, your gender or race disappears. Your foreign counterparts don't see you as a woman or a minority. They see the position or the status of the US government. This is an advantage, and they see you as the position, not as a woman. Women can also empower other women. So just being present can empower others. As a US diplomat, as a civilian in a position of power, and usually as the only female in the room, you can empower the foreign country's female counterparts. This applies not only in foreign environments, but in one's own country as well. For instance, when I was in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, I went to another US intelligence agency for a briefing, and halfway through the presentation, a petite Asian woman entered the room and sat in the back. I smiled at her, and I thought she was an assistant to the male speaker. But once the male speaker noticed her, he stopped and introduced her as his boss and as the head of the operations of a massive enterprise, and ceded the floor to her. It was a lesson in unconscious bias, but also really wonderfully empowering to see a woman like me in charge of an influential US organization. Next, I'd like to talk about challenges. So women's participation can improve outcomes, as I've shared here, but women are often excluded or ignored. For example, one of my colleagues told me that when she negotiates with her Japanese counterparts, when they disagree with her statements, they will sometimes just ignore it, or even when she repeats herself. On one occasion, a junior member of her team, who is male, repeated what she had already emphasized, and it was only then that they finally acknowledged the point. So continued failure to include women ignores their demonstrated contribution and overlooks the potential strategy to respond more effectively to security threats around the world. A colleague in Pakistan told me that her local staff were all male, which affected their ability to access certain parts of society and speak to certain people due to the strict gender segregation of some of the communities. Female officials frequently have access to populations and venues that are closed to men, which allows them to gather intelligence about potential security risks. Oftentimes, women have important information about what's going on, but would only be willing to share that information with other women. Another US diplomat told me that as the human rights officer in a country with a history of sexual abuse and violence, her male predecessors at the US Embassy often just reported statistics provided by the government officials. But as a woman, this US diplomat was able to bring together key female political contacts to gather information. The environment was much more comfortable for women to share stories of sexual harassment and corruption. The female politicians revealed that they had all been propositioned and felt that they had to exchange favors to succeed. The US diplomat was able to provide reports to the State Department on why, despite many female political contenders for president existed, their path to the presidency would be blocked by overwhelming sexual harassment and assault. Lastly, I'd like to talk about growth. As a foreign woman or representative of the US government, we may be accepted and viewed as falling outside of cultural and gender norms of that country. This helps us conduct a business of diplomacy in foreign environments, but it does not help us in domestic environments or in overcoming our own country's institutional barriers. So women aspiring to become leaders in the national security field face two types of gender bias: structural barriers to leadership and individual attitudes and perceptions of female leaders rooted in traditional gender expectations. Both are extremely detrimental to gender equality. The United States and the State Department are not immune to these problems either. Currently, the US diplomatic corps is 32% female in the senior levels. Lack of representation affects our ability to conduct effective diplomacy around the world. There is a need to appoint more women to leadership positions, including ambassadorships. But female representation at the top is not only what is needed. From entry level to the mid-ranks, full participation of women in peace and security is necessary. In the State Department, assignments matter. So landing top assignments in your career opens up doors and pathways to success and allows doors to be opened for mentorship and sponsorship of other women. Biases against women and minorities in leadership roles affect their selection for top assignments. Male job candidates are largely judged by their potential, while female candidates tend to be evaluated based on their past performance. But if women aren't given opportunities to succeed in the first place, how can they even show past performance in order to compete? Women are held to higher standards because their leadership potential is less likely to be recognized than men. Women are implicitly required to show greater evidence of competence to overcome stereotypically negative performance expectations, particularly in male-dominated fields. There are challenges to a woman's credibility in male-dominated environments where men's leadership traits are the standard for comparison. The model for a leader is to be dominant and aggressive, not collaborative and compassionate. However, this paradigm is slowly evolving, and as we've seen in countries like New Zealand, Taiwan, Germany, and others with female leaders, effective leadership does not have to be measured by a standard set by men. There's a lot of work to be done in this area, and one of the silver linings of the pandemic is the demonstration of the efficacy of telework and flexible work systems. The traditional workplace is based on a 1950s model in which the man is the sole income earner in the household, working long hours while the wife takes care of the household and childcare. With women in the workforce, there's a shift, but the system hasn't caught up to the demands of childcare, elder care, and distribution of household labor. Hopefully, through the pandemic, companies and governments can adapt to workplace structures in which family needs are taken into consideration. There's a lot of areas for growth for women, and I hope my presentation was helpful in shedding some light on the role of women in diplomacy and security. And there's a lot of information here that I've discussed for us to analyze. So I welcome any of your questions in the question and answer session. Thank you for your time and attention.